live captions in case anybody else wants them on. They will be available. Well, everybody, welcome back to our afternoon governance and security track for our fall workshop day. My name is Doug. I am one of the board members, and I greatly appreciate our speakers as well as sponsors and all of our attendees. I mean, obviously the attendees, because without people attending, we wouldn't do this. This session is Managing Identity and Security with Microsoft 365 by Pat and Jonathan. Really excited for this session. I absolutely love these. I like security focus around Azure AD and other areas. Just a few announcements. Obviously, this meeting is recorded, as I already stated. If you're not asking a question or asked to speak or responding to anything, please mute yourself. Don't need to hear the chips crunching in your mouth or the toilet flushing. If you do have questions or comments, we love them. They help make this more interactive and more fun. Raise your hand, put them in chat. If the speaker asks people to come off mute, feel free then to ask questions or respond, of course. Live captioning is enabled here, so if you do need that, you can go under More in your settings and turn on live captioning. At the end of this session, within about last 10 minutes or so, depending on feedback from people attending or questions or interaction, that's how we choose our winner of the $25 gift card. At the end of our user group and workshop day today, we will have a grand prize giveaway, and it will be done by the survey submissions. So we do have a survey, and at the end of our session, I ask that you go through and fill that out. It does cover every topic today, like every session you're able to attend. And we do really appreciate that feedback. It helps us build better workshops. It helps us build a better user group because, again, we do this for our community. And without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to put these on. So I do appreciate our sponsors. Again, helps the community groups be able to put on these events. So RBA Success, Concurrency, PEXIP, NICE, and Synology, and obviously, yeah, so appreciate that. With that quick overview done, I can hand that off to you, Pat and Jonathan.
Perfect. Awesome. Let's get a few things queued up here and get the recording all going. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Hopefully everyone had a good, I guess, last hour from a session perspective, or maybe you were able to grab a quick bite to eat. So we're here this afternoon. Two of us, Jonathan, Blaue, and myself, are here to talk a little bit about managing the identity and security with Microsoft 365. So really the key takeaways here is just insights in terms of how the different security products work, as well as some of the other different basic items around AIP and DLP, or data loss prevention, overall. So first and foremost, both of us are. I'm on the left, Jonathan's on the right for it. So I'll do a quick introduction of myself, and then Jonathan, I'll let you do a quick introduction of yourself. So I have been around technology here for the last probably 2 decades, but I've been a Microsoft certified trainer for 10 years. I focus heavily in on the productivity of Microsoft 365. And so security for mine is something that I always encounter and come around, but I'm joined by Jonathan, who is a solution architect on our team as well. So Jonathan, I'll let you do a quick introduction of yourself.
Perfect. Appreciate it, Pat. Yes, as Pat mentioned, I've been with the firm for just over 8 years, about 8.5. And my focus has been pretty much the Microsoft 365 productivity solution architecting. So really anything across the 365 stack, Azure identities, and then really a security and compliance slant across all those different workloads. So making sure that everything's governed properly, everything is secure, all the way from identities all the way down to the individual files. We'll talk about that a little bit today, but Microsoft actually calls it SCIMP. So security, compliance, identity management, and privacy now. So that's their nomenclature. So you can go look up more about that online. So it's good to be with y'all.
And they'll come up with another fancy name for it probably next year when marketing wants to change something, or tomorrow. That was a joke in one of the sessions I was in, where they keep changing the name. And if you use one of the names, was it a hub site? I think Sarah mentioned that in a previous session. If you use the term hub, then Microsoft, that gives them permission to change it. So real quickly, both Jonathan and I do work for organization RSM. RSM is a tax audit consulting organization. There's some information about ourselves. If it wasn't for our company employing us, Jonathan and I wouldn't be able to be here today when it comes to it. So just some information about it. We are an international organization. We are focusing on the small and medium-sized business. We have a little over 1,300 certified Microsoft consultants across the board. Obviously, you can see quite a few in the modern work Microsoft 365 side, like Jonathan and myself. And if we look at some of the more recent awards, Partner of the Year, we're going to write different items for it. So if you do have any Microsoft-related questions or other items, feel free to reach out to Jonathan or myself, and we can get you connected to the right person. That's it from that side. So we're going to start out by talking about the modern work journey. So when we think about what that means, Jonathan and I are going to go through this together here, and then he'll take the demo deep dive. But when we think about what that journey means, I really want us to think back a decade, 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, or even last week. When we think about what a journey means, I like to say that it's not a straight path. And so when we think about where the journey lies here with inside of Microsoft 365, this may be what it looks like for you. Maybe it's a little bit different. I look at how items were organized here in the past, and maybe you started with that productivity side. Maybe you started with moving email up to 365. And so when we think about this overall, as we take a look at the journey, starting out now, if we look at how 365 would be implemented, if we could do it over again, we're probably focusing in on that identity first, right? Because that's the foundational area. And then we move into some of the other different security items, including, device management, modern desktop. And we don't really do anything until we get that security element set up. Now, again, this is best world scenario, and we do understand that some of you probably moved up to 365 quick. I look at what happened 2.5 years ago. I refuse to talk about it anymore in its name. But 2.5 years ago, I mean, if I look at where the world was working and how quick things got done, and how quick things moved, right? There's a chance that you probably need to go back and revisit some of the things that were put in place previously, not only because maybe you missed something, but also because there's new features that are out there. So again, I like to look at this as saying this is the foundation on the left-hand side, and you need to make sure that that's stable and secure and set up correctly. So that way you can do things related to content or external communications, or the idea of way over on the right-hand side of the sensitive information. So this roadmap may not be exactly how you have followed it through it, but ultimately there's a lot of different important items here to cover. So Jonathan, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great overview. And to your point, the way I like to describe it is, as we've moved through the different iterations of, on-prem to hosted, and then kind of managing everything yourself. Think of Microsoft 365 and the productivity platform just as another location for your company, right? So we all know that, Azure, you can host VMs, and that's another location, kind of like a co-location or different branch offices that you have physically on the ground. When we think about security and then ultimately governance and protection, we have to understand that there's fundamental controls that also exist in the cloud, just the same way that fundamental controls exist when we open up a new location, physical security and cameras and door locks and firewalls and those types of things. So, we need to make sure that, excuse me, as we're attempting to be productive and ubiquitous in the way that we're able to allow our end users to get access to the data and be productive, we really need to focus on how are we securing that, and then the nice clean balance of end user experience versus corporate data governance. And so Microsoft has come out with a lot of nice tools and a lot of granularity to allow us to build upon what once was kind of clunky security first and a really bad end user experience, to having that really good security and also a really good end user experience. And so that's what they've been working on over the last 2.5 years as people have rushed to be, a hybrid or remote workforce.
And yeah, and I think that that's a key element here for it, is as everyone's rushed to it, there's, maybe other tools that you have in place today. So the next item here is just to talk through some of the vendors that you may have, access today to or have used in the past, and where Microsoft can fit in. I know, from an end user perspective, we're obviously constantly battling off some of the third-party tools, and maybe there's opinions around Google, for instance, or Slack, or Facebook work in that case, or even Box or Dropbox in some of the items in terms of managing that. But more importantly, even also on the back end piece of it. So Jonathan, any specific items you want to highlight here, or vendors highlighting, and how Microsoft has maybe eliminated or helped neutralize some of those?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point to maybe just call out a few, right? So Okta, I know, is a big one. That is generally, depending on business requirements, Azure Active Directory can handle a lot of your SAML and SaaS integration SSO. There's Azure AD App Proxy, which can handle on-premise web clients. So again, if you're looking to have single sign-on into on-premise web applications, Azure AD has come a long way from being able to be that true source of identity as it relates to SaaS applications, SAML, things of that nature. So I know Okta is one that's in use that we've helped a lot of organizations consolidate really the cost and even the end user functionality. Right there in the middle, I think, are the big ones. There are a lot of traditional mobile device management solutions. So that's really where we start looking at Intune, but Mobile Iron, Mass 360, Google MDM, Meraki MDM, Manage Engine. There are a lot of the MDMs out there, and they do a very good job at the MDM components. But as we kind of get into some of the other topics today, we'll look at why Intune specifically is good from an integration perspective, and not only just the security side of it, but also the deployment and IT operations perspective, where we can start deploying laptops and imaging laptops directly from the cloud. So
perfect. So when we take a look, for us here, I think there's a few items, to call out for us, and I'm going to just click through this here a little bit faster because I know everyone likes to see hands-on demo and less on deck side of the world here. So as I go through for it, I think a lot of this does map right to a variety of different pieces. And so when you start to take a look at where those items map through, you might hear some of the buzzwords, and the map above it, I should say, is not necessarily just buzzwords, but more or less kind of key themes, right? Where down below might be a little bit too granular. And so bringing that up when you're talking with your other stakeholders, other leadership, inside of your organization, focusing in on, maybe that shadow IT aspect of it, and where does that map? What maps to that area? Or even, taking a look at threat protection and what does that include? And it's not just one item, right? And so maybe that's also including single sign-on from there, as well as obviously connecting into the Office applications or SharePoint in particular. The one that I really like, and I'm not sure if there's a session on that today. I don't have the schedule memorized, but that productivity analytics, right? There's so much data captured, and not necessarily from an end user side to be able to keep track of, but from an IT side. So when you start to take a look at where all that data is and how you can surface that data, and being it, making that available is really important in being able to keep track of it. And then of course, once your data is there, then then you take a look at some of the searching and compliance and governance items that go with it. So with that, again, I think it's just important to make mention of what that looks like overall. So next item here as we take a look is really a comparison for us from an Office 365 to a Microsoft 365. And I know there's some of you that are GCC and GCCI in here as well. And Jonathan and I certainly are not Microsoft licensing experts. We don't have our doctorate degree or advanced degree in Microsoft licensing. And I always joke on these types of sessions that I think if we had a workshop or a topic that was just ask a Microsoft licensing expert, we would probably have, max amount of team users there. So Doug, thank you. That M365 Maps is the link that saves us on a probably daily or at least weekly basis in terms of a comparison. But when we start to think about it for us, where do we typically see clients go, or where the typical baseline is right at that, E3 level, or M365 E3, I should say, level, right? Because it comes with some of those additional levels of security than just base access. So I think it's important really to kind of cover where are you at today and where can you go? And certainly if you're someone that is paying the E5 prices, what are you missing out on? What do you have available to it today? And that's really a license optimization option for you. In terms of that aspect of it, when we think about the idea of license optimization, this is a conversation that happens in the Petersen household on a monthly basis in terms of are we using Netflix? Are we using Disney Plus? Are we using Hulu or Apple TV and all the different streaming services out there? Is it worthwhile? And Jonathan just has an informal poll that he's chat bombing us with. If you want to go ahead and just give a thumbs up or a reaction, if you have, no polls today, but it's an informal one. Just go ahead and say, which license type you're using. If you want to give it a thumbs up, that will just make sure that when we're providing examples, we're calling out the specific license. A lot of E5 so far. And again, for those of you that are government side of it, you'll have to just replace the E with a G for that as well. And obviously adding in and including that in as well. So that certainly does help. Thank you for that. Oh, and then education. Gosh, Doug, you're killing me here.
A's and G's. Yeah, I like it. That's good stuff. Hey, so we got other people that know the licensing on here. I like it.
Yeah. We should just turn this into a group conversation about licensing.
We could do licensing.
I will end this meeting.
Yeah, I will end this meeting. Yeah, exactly. Freaking PhD in nonsense to understand Microsoft licensing. So yeah.
But I think it's important, to take a step back, use that maps side of it quite a bit, because if you're at a license today and they're talking about how you can get to one in the future, Jonathan and I were on a call yesterday with a client where we, mentioned the baseline and where we recommend they go, and they challenged and said, but not all of our users need all of those features. And we said, well, for the price point, you probably want this license, but then also looking at it and doing a comparison and say, what does this other license give you and what are you missing out on? And mailbox size is important. The security stuff obviously is important as well. So starting to identify where those differences are. And the reason why that becomes important is when you get to some of those less expensive licensing, you lose access to not only the security stuff, but some of the productivity stuff as well. And if you had to take any of your users and say, sorry, we're not going to pay the, a business premium license for you, we're going to jump you down to an F3 because you get the similar feature set. And now you're saying, hey, by the way, you have to use the online applications. You're probably going to get someone to revolt against you because they really like Excel desktop. And so I think that that's an important, item to think about and take a look at. So we're going to move off of licensing. It's done. Jonathan, I think you got your answers there. We got a lot of E5s and business premium, which is good to hear. But we also didn't give everyone a whole lot of options of other licenses out there too. So oh, and then billing. I see that from Tyler as well. No, we're done. We're done with this. We're moving on. Perfect. All right. So with that, Jonathan, I'll let you talk through the zero trust side of the world and just let me know when we need to advance the slides.
Sure. Yeah, so I think Microsoft's fundamental principles, and I know I actually joined one of the other sessions today, so I thought it was a very good overview of kind of the identity side and conditional access and how MFA isn't necessarily enough and things of that nature. And I totally agreed with that. As somebody that was going to be presenting today later, I just want to reiterate the fact that, you know, this zero trust framework is not just a Microsoft thing too, right? Like you can see other vendors really jumping into this zero trust space. It's an ideology, it's a framework, it's how do we do zero trust the best, and across the different areas of our organization, there are going to be different solutions and different approaches to hybrid environments, fully cloud environments, fully on-prem environments, government environments, things of that nature, all with their own caveats and needs. So while there is more to it, again, the way I always associate this is your identity in the cloud is your public IP address on-prem. Like everybody has always been very, and still are, you know, we need to be very concerned about the entry point. And so, you know, our public IP address, our name on the internet is, you know, how we need to control that. And so identities has really become the jumping off point of adopting the cloud. And so, yes, there's MFA, yes, there's blocking legacy authentication and foreign IPs potentially or what have you, but MFA fatigue is real. I've got a member of my team that just set up a Evil Engine X or Evil Jinx or however you want to you know, call that, and within 20 minutes was able to basically steal somebody's MFA token and get into their environment, so to speak, as part of a demo. And what we noticed was, as soon as we introduced the devices, the trusted devices or the lack thereof, or the unknown devices, it immediately stopped that token in its tracks, because while your MFA is good, conditional access, or what Microsoft considers the zero trust engine, the engine that's taking in all of these different signals and trying to understand, should I be allowed, should I not be allowed, we saw immediately, hey, this device, you know, MFA is good, the device is unknown or untrusted, therefore you're not allowed into corporate devices or into the corporate resources. And so really the path is, how do we do this methodology, and in what order do we do it? So we always follow, you know, and I think it's best practice to follow, or leading practice to follow, some sort of cybersecurity framework. So NIST is very popular, NIST CSF, that's more broad. Center for Internet Security is a really good benchmark, so to speak, of what controls should I be putting in place right out of the gate. As I mentioned before, those fundamental controls. And so the items in CIS will allow you to capture a lot of the identity items, such as blocking legacy authentication, MFA for everybody, MFA for admins. NIST 800-171, that's a doozy. We could certainly talk about that. And then Section 7 of that is all about mobile device management and all the different controls that you should have, things of that nature. So those two components together, those first two components, are really fundamental when we approach this and say, when we stand up a new tenancy, what are those items that need to get in there? It's those two. It's identity and device. Verifying access, again, comes along with, yes, network segmentation and infrastructure. So, you know, MFA for VPNs is new. MFA for all admin activities. I'm sure everybody's heard of that with cyber insurance policies, and hey, are you blocking all of your, you know, are you only allowing admin activities through a jump box and things of that nature? So that's become pretty convoluted and complicated as the cyber insurance carriers have stepped up their requirements. And then verify services, right? So what are we getting access into? And then ultimately, and we'll talk about this here in a sec, is data, right? So identities, devices, the applications themselves, and then ultimately protecting all three of those is really about our intellectual property, our corporate data, and not just our internal employees, right? Like, we're probably even more worried about our clients' data. Like, they're entrusting us with the services that we provide, or what have you, to make sure that when they're passing us stuff, we're protecting their stuff probably even more than we're protecting our own, because that can hurt our reputation. It can hurt the ability for us to, you know, for people to work with us, and things of that nature. And so a good portion of this will be talking about the DLP framework of products within this. But zero trust is a good jumping off point. And I would highly argue that MFA just isn't enough anymore. A great starting place, but we need to go further, and we need to do it quicker. So Pat, next slide, please. So when we think about XDR, traditionally, what is XDR? XDR is extended detection and response. So traditionally, we've had endpoint detection and response for very good reason. Our users sit behind our devices, right? And so, as much as we don't want to harp on that, that is traditionally where the most organic risk is people clicking on things, people not understanding what they're opening, people getting phishing emails and things of that nature. But what we've done is we've extended from the endpoint. There are so many different other resources and areas of our environment, our IaaS environments, our PaaS applications, even our legacy on-premise locations. How are we detecting and responding those? So extended detection and response is the ability to detect and respond across your entire organization. So as you can see here, what we have is kind of, again, another framework of ideas of how to do that. And so kind of talking through, we talked about the left side, which I said is as you kind of work from left to right, it's very easy to start with a methodology. Okay, how are we going to adopt these things? Start with identities, move down to your devices, run all of those things through conditional access. And then once you've kind of provided the burden of proof, okay, I'm good, I'm on a good device, I'm on a good identity. Now, what are those other granular controls that we can have? And so ultimately, as you can see on the right, we have apps, data, and then obviously infrastructure and network are also very important. There are a lot of controls that we can do around that. We won't touch too many on those today for the bottom right. But applications is really, again, back to Okta, how can we tie as many SaaS applications or line of business applications into our identity engine? That'll give us centralized audit logging, especially for regulated industries. It'll give us centralized control. We can start adding trusted devices and trusted identities to NetSuite or Salesforce or Dynamics or what have you, right? So anything that's kind of supported through there, we can now start to add these granular policies all through Azure AD and conditional access, not just to Microsoft native applications, but really anything that ties in through this standard SAML authentication. You can even start doing user provisioning, just as a side note. So you can start doing, if I add a user, these are the 6 applications that I want this user to be a part of. Let's take the guesswork out of it. Let's make sure that we're being consistent across, this user should be a user in this application, but they should be an admin in this application. All of that can be automated today with relativity depending on the application. And then data. So as we move through this, we're going to start to talk more about Microsoft information protection. As a note, RSM is able, and not just from a selling perspective, it's more the value add that we have been going through a relatively rigorous process to be able to support our clients in the government space and the government GCC high space. So we were just recently awarded the ability, the 50th company in the United States, to be able to resell and support from an implementation perspective, GCC high environments. So folks that are in the DIB or CMMC or ITAR, things of that nature, we are able to do those implementations, help you think through those controls and things of that nature. So that's kind of a pretty proud moment for us that just happened. So appreciate that. Thank you. So with that being said, Pat, why don't we go to the next slide? So this is a little bit more in-depth. I'll just run through these pretty quickly, but just pointing out that Okta and other IAMs and identity providers can be consolidated, and then we can get a lot more granular on the capabilities that we have if we're using Azure AD and Intune together. But one thing we have to think of is, a lot of people look at this and they say, well, it's going to cost money to implement these new things, or there's going to be end user change, things of that nature. What we also want to look at is, again, we want to drive requirements, but we also want to look at cost compression and what bang for our buck can we get, such as the folks that have these E5 licenses. You have everything under the sun. Now, how do we just implement that in the right way, and in what order do we do it? So if you've already made that operational cost and put that into your budget. Now it's just a matter of turning on the light switches. For those of you that might not already be there, it's a matter of the total ROI of, hey, let's get rid of these 3 or 4 different vendors that could be replaced by this one single license. It makes onboarding users easier. It makes the standardization of policies and procedures across your organization easier. And honestly, from a support perspective, depending on who's supporting it, you really lower the amount of vendors that you have to get in touch with. There's a lot of finger pointing going on, who actually caused this outage, which part do we have to fix, things of that nature. So the more we can consolidate the underlying vendors that we use to support our infrastructure, those soft costs are going to start to be realized across your licensing operational costs. So, Pat? Next. So we will stop here. So again, let's just go into this a little more detail. So Azure Information Protection is an important component that we'll touch on, and it's part of the new Microsoft 365 Microsoft Information Protection. So Microsoft Information Protection isn't necessarily so much a tool as much as it is a brand family, like Purview or things of that nature. It's a collection of different capabilities within Microsoft that really follow and are looking at protecting sensitive information. So Azure Information Protection falls into that data classification and labeling kind of area. That's more of the general industry term, data classification and labeling. And then Cloud App Security actually is really kind of I would say, hidden gem. It is really a Swiss Army knife of tooling within itself to help you provide governance, shadow IT discovery, and then ultimately DLP and even alerting and reporting and things of that nature. So it is kind of becoming the aggregation point of Microsoft. And then on top of that, Microsoft is starting to put all of their security products into a single pane of glass, which we all know that'll change soon. But they are doing a good job of essentially doing the Microsoft 365 Defender framework and having all of those products speak to each other. And we can certainly talk about that. So Cloud App Security is good. Azure Information Protection is really more of a mature stage of traditional perimeter DLP and then retention. So we always talk about DLP retention and data classification and labeling when we talk about DLP. So again, Microsoft Information Protection. It's a suite of items. Know your data. Where is my data? What do I do with it? How do I know it's in my environment? Who has access to it? A lot of people sometimes can't ask or answer these questions. So I talk to clients all the time and I'm like, what policies do you want to create? And they're like, well, we only have bank accounts, routing numbers, social security numbers, and X, Y, and Z. So we make policies around that. And when we get those policies in place, Microsoft actually organically, if you have a lot of your data in 365 workloads today, it's going to start going out and looking for known sensitive information types out of the gate. And what we've noticed is that 50% of the data types that we were given aren't in the list that was found in Microsoft. And so those are the types of things that when it comes to compliance, it's less about the technicalities of what you're going to do and more about the design. I think the design and the architecture and the understanding is kind of a lost art because people just want to get these controls in place. They're under a deadline and they don't necessarily either have the budget nor the time to go through a proper discovery. Let's plan this out. Let's put it all on paper. And then once we know what we're going to do, especially from a business decisions perspective, then we can go and map that to technical controls. And that's really where the compliance manager can come into place, Microsoft Compliance Manager. So we can certainly touch on that as well. Protecting your data, what tool are we going to use? Is it perimeter? Are we just going to do in-flight encryption with email encryption? And that's even becoming more legacy because now we're having to worry about, well, I'm sharing files out from OneDrive, I'm sharing files out from Teams and SharePoint. How do I protect those? And I would almost argue that sharing from those is actually safer in the sense that, as soon as I send an email, it's gone. The recalls, yes, we've all tried recalls. They don't work. And so it's like, shoot, I hit send. But when you send a file, you're just sending a link to somebody with access to an identity. If you mess up, you just go into that file and say, remove access from that person, and you're safe and sound because you're bringing people into your environment. You're not sending data out. And that's also a different approach in mind frame as well, is something to think about. Is maybe it's better for us to bring people into our environment in proper ways and segregate them. But rather than sending it out, not knowing if we do have the proper controls as we send it out, and then potentially missing something, and then it's out in the wild. So that's something to think about as well. Preventing the data loss, again, we'll go through, Cloud App Security or Defender for Cloud Apps is a part of your DLP. Defender for Endpoint is part of your DLP. Intune is absolutely part of DLP, and that's basically the whole premise of it. It's put MAM and put MDM on your phones so that we can govern our corporate data on devices that we don't own. That's literally the whole functionality, is how do we protect our data? Not are we trying to see people, what they're doing on Twitter and Facebook and Netflix and all of those things. That's not what it's about. It's about us controlling our data, similar to when we issue you a corporate Windows 10 device. Nobody blinks if we're doing that. But when it's the personal phone, we need to balance why we're doing this and message that properly. And then again, governing. So putting those policies in place to allow people to be, allow people to do their jobs, but also have the proper controls in place, and then also not breaking workflows. And we'll talk about that in Azure Information Protection when we talk about encrypting files, how we have to be careful about that. So, Pat? So with that being
demo time for you. It's up to demo time.
Yep, demo time. I'm good with that. Let's see here. So what's the time check? I think we have, is that 20 minutes or 50 minutes?
You have another 15
minutes. 50?
Put my mic on. About 50 minutes, I believe, because it goes till 2:30.
Okay, perfect. So we can do a lot of demoing, and then happy to again, as we move through this stuff, happy to take questions on the side. Pat, if you want to field those, or let me know that there's some, if there are any, I'm happy to stop, and we can be very fluid with this stuff.
I have no problem interrupting you, as always.
Love it. Keep me on my toes. So let's see here. Any questions so far? And feel free to, I'm going to pull up a few things here, so feel free to come off mute if you have any questions, raise your hand, etc. Perfect. Looks good. This is always the most nerve-wracking part. Which one of my 74 windows am I going to share? The
most inappropriate one is the answer.
That's right. That's right. Well, the problem is each window then has 60 tabs open in it. So it's like, my memory's off the chart. Okay. So a couple things here. I think one of the most important parts is understanding, the compliance and security side of things. So everybody knows there's a ton of different admin portals, and here, let's see if this moves with. Oh yeah, that's perfect. This over here. So I just want to go through a few things. So I guess if we just want to recap, what exactly did we talk about? So, we have our conditional access policies. Again, you can have as many or as little as you want. In theory, it probably shouldn't look like, a 20-year-old firewall with all the different rules and commands that have been put in through the years. But that being said, depending on the size of the organization, there will be different needs across different departments and the granularity that's needed there. So you can, this certainly can, build up pretty quickly. Some of the things in here that I think are important are understanding, the fact that we can do session controls on Dropbox. So if I am sanctioning Dropbox to be a known corporate data location, I want to know what's going on in there. I have the ability to even connect APIs through Defender for Cloud Apps, and not only just control the access to there and making sure people aren't downloading stuff, but I can actually see data going into Dropbox, and if it's sensitive or if it's data that we don't necessarily want to go in there, we can prevent that from happening. So those capabilities are, only across some of the larger and well-known SaaS applications, but for the most part, those are the types of capabilities that we have. I think another big thing for session control on through here is the use case where we have a personal desktop operating system device. So for instance, again, during the pandemic, we had a lot of folks that weren't able to get laptops out to people, and they said, hey, if you have a home device, just get on it, start working, here's your password, et cetera, et cetera. And so what Defender for Cloud Apps is able to do is it is a cloud access security broker, right? So that's the formal term for what that product is. And what you can do is you can do proxy control through that. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is if you are on a personal computer and you browse to, so this is my admin portal, but we can probably still do it. If we browse to demorsm.sharepoint.com, and again, I had to turn off some of these policies because it'll break the functionality. But if I go in here and I'm like, okay, I need to get to my files and I need to get to my OneDrive, what'll happen is this will actually get proxied through Defender for Cloud Apps. And so you'll own this entire session because they logged into this site with their corporate identity. And so it passes through conditional access that says, hey, so-and-so is on a unmanaged device, and they are coming in from Windows 10, and they're coming in through the browser. And it's like, okay, perfect. So once it hits that, it will feed through Defender for Cloud Apps. It'll send them to this site, but this will have a proxy around it. And there can even be a banner on here that will say, your admins have prevented printing, copying, downloading, things of that nature. And so what that does is it, similar to iOS and Android, it containerizes that session with those controls. And so you can utilize, you can utilize the application and get to your data, but you aren't able to bring that data then down to an unmanaged device. And so that was a really popular use case, and still can be, when you're allowing folks to use personal desktop operating systems. You can block the desktop apps. So Microsoft can determine whether or not you are coming from a desktop app versus a browser. So they did make that distinguish. They did distinguish that, and so you can block the mobile and desktop apps, and you can force people into the browser, and then you can force that policy on them. So that's one of the things I think that ties back pretty cleanly to conditional access, along with all of your other 365, your MFA, your blocking legacy authentication, blocking foreign IPs, things of that nature. So that one I think is important. The other components, again, if we go over to Purview, is just the compliance manager. I think it's important to
Jonathan, real quick, before you jump in the compliance manager, there's a question that came in a couple minutes ago. Does Azure security standards also incorporate things like Dynamics 365 and or our favorite topic, virtual desktop?
Yeah, so again, as we get further into kind of the virtual desktop or the IaaS and PaaS space, there is a Defender for Cloud, so just Defender for Cloud, that lives over on the Azure subscription side, and I can actually pull that up. And so what that does is, so from a Dynamics perspective, not necessarily. Dynamics really just utilizes Azure AD as the identity engine to get in there. Once you're within Dynamics, Dynamics has essentially its own, the RBAC controls and some of the leading practices there. But more or less, outside of saying I want somebody to do MFA and or I only want people from the finance department or the accounting department, on their devices to get into Dynamics, whether it's CRM or BC or what have you, we can lock it down at that level. But essentially, once you're in Dynamics, there's, it's really more within the Dynamics platform. However, on the IaaS and PaaS side, that's where Defender for Cloud comes in, which I believe it was an aggregation of Azure Security Center and one other product. And so what that will do is similar to Secure Score or Compliance Manager, or if we get into Defender, it's not in here for security. So again, like a device score, things of that nature. Secure score for devices, essentially. Management. So here's more of like a device, so what I call device score, so exposure score. So essentially a secure score for devices. You have your traditional secure score for identities, and then you have the compliance manager. What Defender for Cloud will do is essentially look across your different workloads, whether it's SQL PaaS, whether it's VMs, and start to give you, again, recommendations, just in time, securing ports, remediating vulnerabilities, things of that nature. So there's a whole slew of things that you can run through this. And then again, if you use Azure Arc, I'm not sure if anybody's using Arc today, bring in VMs from Amazon, bring in VMs from on-prem, bring in VMs from GCP, and now essentially you have a one-stop shop of not only management, but then tying those resources into Defender for Cloud and giving you security postures, regulatory compliance, things of that nature. The other thing I'll note is Sentinel. So as much as Sentinel is a SIM, naturally or inherently, Sentinel has started to build on top of their workbooks and build on top of some of their solutions, as they call it, to give people zero trust maps or CMMC alignment. So even CMMC 2.0. So essentially you go out, you get the CMMC 2.0 workbook, you throw that into Sentinel, and then you bring in all the logs across all of your different sources, and it'll tell you, hey, what do you need to do here and there in order to start aligning with some of these regulatory bodies and things of that nature. So yeah, as far as hopefully that answered some of the questions, but virtual desktop, yes. So again, as you're running Azure Virtual Desktop, again, that's just a Windows 365 shared machine or standalone, but traditionally it's a multi-user machine. The Windows 10 baselines or the controls just kind of extend into the Azure AD environment, and or the Azure Virtual Desktop environment, and try to use similar controls there. Obviously, there's a little bit of nuance there, given that there's multiple users on it, but there are recommendations for those. So, good question. So as we look through Compliance Manager again, for anybody that's in the regulated space, or even if you're not, yeah, they finally got up to the free premium assessments. They were giving out all their assessments essentially for free to let people know how to use them. But this is a very good way of maturing your environment, not only from a controls perspective, but there are a lot of alignment in here related to paper policies and procedure and what you need to do on the non-technical side of things, and those are mapped in here on an assessment. So if we look at improvement actions, that there's probably going to be a lot, considering I have a lot of assessments built out in here. But when we think of assessment, again, in the Microsoft term, assessment really means pick what regulatory framework you want to align to, and then go assess the controls in my environment, most often technical. So go across all my workloads and look at DLP and look at Azure and endpoint management and all those things, and then come back and give me a score. Where am I at? And so if I need to align to HIPAA, here's all my controls, even the control bodies, right? So Microsoft has worked directly with these these regulators to map to NIST, to map to HIPAA, to map to FFIEC, and all those, so that people are working with the proper control bodies. And then you can start to see where you fall within that. And clearly should not have any HIPAA data in here. So, and then again, it'll pull out, what are your improvement actions? And as you can see, right on the top here, just probably because it's alphabetical, apply sensitivity labels. Okay. So before we get to sensitivity labels, what you would want to do is we generally start with data loss prevention. And so what I can do in data loss prevention is I can what I call sensitive information type groups, because in theory, there are multiple sensitive information types within HIPAA. So again, let's just kind of keep going down the HIPAA route. FedRAMP. Yeah, FedRAMP high. Any other questions? What about, yes, so is there an assessment for FedRAMP? I'm pretty sure there is, or if there's not, there's NIST frameworks that'll help you align to that. But and FedRAMP, I believe, is in here. Let's just check that real quick while we have that question. So if I wanted to add an assessment, now you can create your own. So actually what you can do is you can create your own assessment template. So if there's different controls alongside of the standard ones, you can create a custom template and upload it so that you can have everything in the FedRAMP high. And so it's funny, what they've started to do now is look at all these. So FedRAMP moderate, FedRAMP high. I think actually Government Community Cloud just was able to bring their data centers up to FedRAMP high standards on the Microsoft 365 side, whereas before I think it was just at moderate. But what you'll see here, and you'll see this across a lot of the assessments, is Microsoft has started to tune this down to be the focus on just what you would do within 365. So like I was saying, these aren't necessarily just limited to, oh, this is just the stuff I have to do within 365. If you want the full, if you want the full gambit across the board on what do I need to do on-prem, what do I need to do with my hybrid environment, what policies and procedures do I need in place, they have built those out. So that you can look across everything, or you can just say, hey, look, I'm doing that with somebody else, or I have another tool that's helping me align to FedRAMP moderate outside of 365. I don't care about that. Okay, just give me the stuff that I need to do within 365. And so you'll see a lot of those. That helps people be more pointed on, on a smaller list of, recommended action items and controls and things of that nature. Good question there. So back to DLP. I'm going to get into one of the policies so we can take a look at what that looks like. So if we want to make a policy, I hate that they do that. We can jump into this policy here. And so I believe I have this on devices only, or at least that's what I was testing. So one of the I will share something. One of the things to note here is the more locations that you select here, the less options you're actually going to have when you get to the rules. And the reason for this is because Microsoft will give you the lowest common denominator of the items of the DLP capabilities that it has across all of those. So it is kind of counterintuitive, because the way they phrase it is like, hey, you can have a single policy. It'll be across all of your, different workloads. And in some respects, that actually is a good thing. So one of the ways we start out is we will do a blanket policy across everything for auditing purposes. So when I talked about discovery, it's like, hey, let's just go audit everything and understand it. That's a good use case for like checking everything. But when it comes down to rule-making, we really want to be careful and probably spread out the different workloads, because Exchange, for instance, the actions you can see on here are a lot greater than if I, for instance, so you saw all those action items. So if I go back and I check all these, let's just check these. I go back in here. Hopefully I'm not proving myself wrong. See that one action item? That's because this is the only thing that Microsoft would be able to do across all of those different locations. Whereas if I'm only on Exchange, then it's like, oh yeah, you have all these different options. So now I can do all of these different things. And then one of the things that we want to look at is, okay, so what sensitive info types are we looking at? And then these are pre-built. So these were pre-built by HIPAA, the HIPAA template to be able to look at that. Now, one of the other things I can do is, again, I can look at I can look at other areas or conditions of what's being looked at, such as the document or the properties or the file extension or what have you. And I'm trying to find. Oh, hold on just one moment here. I had this built and then I removed it. What I'm trying to show here is the fact that you're able to look at a sensitive information type. And so the reason that's important is because, or a sensitivity label rather. And the reason that's important is because when we talk about sensitivity labels, we're looking at people that are manually labeling certain sensitive information. And so that's really important, again, in regulated industries or even government entities where you have CUI data or you have SEC data or HIPAA data that's very specific to your organization. So you're able to go out and even create regular expressions or again, known sensitivity labels that says, hey, this is very specific to our organization. It doesn't match any of the known sensitive info types. So we're going to start tagging our data, and then we're going to tie that to a DLP policy. And I'm trying to find that. Pat, how we doing? Any questions? Doesn't sound like it.
No, there's been nothing other than the FedRAMP side of the world. But this is, when you take a look at some of the options in here in terms of setting up the conditions and those items, I think that's really key because it, there's a lot of different pieces there. And I always like to say with all of the items here, it's really quick to set up a rule. It takes a lot longer from a business decision to understand or to meet probably multiple meetings to identify what the rules should be. And so that's probably the biggest piece here is, we could set this up very quickly, but from an organizational approach, it's, I think, important to, understand all the what ifs, right, when you start to do these items.
Yeah, that's right. And so, so real quickly, I want to switch screens because I want to show the sensitivity labels, and where they would be, where they would be set up. So one, creating a sensitivity label is very quick, again, from a technical perspective. But when we think about the design and the plan to get there, and we'll come back to this, coming back to creating a label is, let's see here. Compliance manager, information protection. So when we think about the label, so we have labels and we have label policies. So labels are going to be what's actually published to, and I'll show you where these are at. So these are the ones that are published. These are going to be the items that we actually are attaching to Office documents, PDFs, and then again, Microsoft's in the process of switching the capability of tagging non-Office documents and non-PDFs and other items. They used to have what they call the unified labeling client, which you would download and then you could essentially label any type of document. They're working on some architectural changes there. But essentially, you need to plan these out. You need to understand and define what all of these labels mean on paper is a leading practice. And then the order of the order is also important because it determines what label is more sensitive than the next. And the reason that is and I'll show you here in the GUI, is if I try to change a label from a higher to a lower, I'm going to have to explain why I'm essentially decreasing the sensitivity of that file and potentially taking off encryption or things of that nature. And so this is essentially where you can create those labels. So if we go into the name of it and we talk about, okay, well, what is it targeting? You can actually tag groups and sites, which I want to point something out here because there was a lot of confusion when this first came out. So allowing a label to be tagged on groups and sites is not the underlying content. It really actually is more of an RBAC control that goes above and beyond like the RBAC that you have on a SharePoint site. So if I'm going to a site and I know I have the access to it from a traditional RBAC perspective, that's fine. But if that site is then tagged as, sensitive information HR only, then I'm not a part of that label, I'm not going to be able to get into that site. And so there's a lot of different use cases there, but this does not automatically label like all the content that goes into a document library or into the site. That being said, it is on Microsoft's roadmap, which I think a lot of people have been waiting for, where they are going to give you the ability now, similar to retention labels, they are going to give you the ability to put a default sensitivity label on a document library. So that being said, if I have a bunch of sensitive information and I need to quickly label it, or I need to make sure that it's labeled, I can now drag and drop files into that document library or into that site or into that location, and it will automatically get a label versus me having to individually do it. Yeah, there's.
Do you know what that, Jonathan? Will the label follow the item if it's moved to a different library?
It will. Yep. So it is essentially it's the same functionality. It's the auto application of the label to that file, and once that label's on there, then it doesn't matter. Yeah, it'll follow it. And then we just need to, you would need to understand, is that a protected label or is that an unprotected? So again, we can have non-protected labels. And so this is really what brings in the encryption or the information rights management component of Microsoft Information Protection. So this right here is what is enabling or enforcing the identity protection of Azure Information Protection. So again, just to reiterate, Azure Information Protection is essentially Newman's Excel password protected Excel doc. I take an Excel doc, I email it to somebody, I send it to somebody, I send them a flash drive, whatever that is. So they have that Excel doc, and then they go and they open it up and they're like, hey, I need a password. And if they don't have the password, they hit cancel and then they can't do anything with it. So they call up the person that sent it to them, they get the password, they type it in, and then they can see all the content, right? What Azure Information Protection does is essentially replaces that password with an Azure identity. So again, a lot of people ask, well, what about when I send it to Google or Yahoo or Comcast or whatever that is? Yes, those individual identities will need to at least create a free Microsoft account based off of that email address so that they can establish that identity in the Azure AD kind of ecosphere. But then once that's done, then they use that identity to be able to say whether or not they can open or close those files, or open or access those files. But outside of that, it's that free account. And then once you have the encryption on it, then you can add their identities to the label, and then when the label's sent out, they'll be able to open it. So again, you can do the traditional, classified or eyes only or whatever that is. So you can use mark items, you can do custom headers and footers and things of that nature. Remove encryption if the file or email is encrypted. So this is interesting in the sense that if it's already encrypted, do we want to be able to remove encryption with this label? So these are some of the newer settings that are coming out. And then again, configure the encryption settings. So there's two ways to do this. There's assign the permissions now, which literally means as soon as I apply it, use these below settings. And then, or let the users assign it. And as you can see, all the options change. And so what will this sensitivity label be able to do? Double key encryption is pretty interesting. That's for organizations that don't necessarily want Microsoft to have all the keys to the kingdom, or for compliance reasons. There are a lot of known compliance reasons. So double key encryption essentially says, yes, Microsoft, you're going to use one encryption key, but we're actually going to hold on to the other key. And so in order for that encryption to, for that full decryption to happen, you have to, somebody has to have access to that key and things of that nature. So there are some use cases there, not used a lot. And so do not forward and encrypt only. Again, those are kind of the built-in information rights management one, where it kind of sends you to a portal, whereas a sensitivity label will actually allow you to encrypt the email with a sensitivity label, send it over to that other person. And as long as they are kind of within Outlook and they have that known identity in Azure AD, it'll be a very seamless experience. They can open that encrypted document right within Outlook versus having to do like hey, send me a one-time passcode and then go into this separate portal and reply from the portal. It's all done within Outlook through the seamless integrations that Microsoft has created between the Outlook application and the Azure Information Protection solution. So as we keep going here, I won't do the Outlook one. Oh, I guess I got to choose something. So content markings, again, watermark, header, footer, etc. So, classified. And
would this also be able to be attached to the Outlook mobile device as well?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So you'll see sensitivity labels. Essentially, you should be able to see those across all the native Office apps across operating systems. This is dangerous. Be careful with auto labeling, especially right out of the gate. In theory, or as a leading practice, as our belief in leading practice, crawl, walk, run. Pilot everything, crawl, walk, and run, especially for compliance stuff. This can very quickly break your entire environment, especially if you're using an encrypted label. Not using an encrypted label, not as big of a deal. If you're encrypting, if it's an encrypted label, be careful with this. And then again, just some other items here. And then again, data assets and using Purview using Purview data map as a solution, that's a whole other topic for a whole other time. But then essentially, so then you have this label and then the policy. So again, we have these RBAC controls. The policy actually will say, who should we push these labels to? So if you start to get into a situation where you have a number of sub-labels and you have departmental labels and things of that nature, if I'm the IT department, I shouldn't need to see an HR label, right? That HR label is not relevant to me. It's not going to go on any of my documents. I don't need to see that. So the policies will then tell you, okay, what individuals within the company will I actually send this out to so that it shows up in their list of labels to be applied. And so again, you have a default label policy. That's essentially everybody should have those, and then so on and so forth down the list. And then again, you go back to auto labeling. Again, this is more of the run stage. Our crawl stage is manual. Send it to users, let them identify what they think it is. The walk stage is recommending labels. But again, having to provide business justifications if they're not using the label that you recommended to them. And the way you do recommendations is you're able to look and scan the document and see if there's any sort of marking in there or some sort of known sensitive information type. And if it finds it, it'll say, hey, based off of what I see in this document, I think you should be using this label. If they use it, perfect. If they don't, and it's a lesser sensitivity, they're going to have to provide a business justification, and then compliance or risk or IT will get those. So now that we've kind of seen the back end, let's just go real quickly, take a look at what this looks like on the front end. So now I'm in essentially as a user, and I'm going to create a new email. And again, for the purpose of this, I'm using the web client. The web client generally always has the later features or the newest features, but you can do these. This functionality exists within the Office, the desktop Office products. So I'm going to type, an email to Pat Petersen. Oh man, is it ON or EN? Oh boy, I'm going to check.
It's Ian. You have it right.
Oh
You're
my
good.
gosh. And I'm going to do a test, and then I'm going to do another test. And so what can happen here is so you'll see encrypt. This is generally the old information rights management, which is more of the I send it, it encrypts it on, in transit, and then when it gets to the person, then that's where they have to kind of do the portal and make sure that they are who they say they are, and it's a little less, intuitive and seamless. But with a sensitivity label, now you can see those labels that we were just looking at are published to me so that I can choose which one I want to use. Now, some of these are not encrypted, and some of these are encrypted. And then the middle ground is where, let's say I have public. Generally, public is marketing material, so I can send this out as public, and I don't even necessarily need a DLP policy around it. But let's say I have an internal use only label or general label that essentially says, and here, this is where it posts, okay, I've labeled this email. It might not necessarily be encrypted, so the encryption that we talked about, but I absolutely can tag a DLP policy to this label, essentially the GUID on the back end. So I go through and I say, hey, if it's labeled general or it's labeled internal use only, don't send this out. And the reason you might do that is because, let's say, for example, I don't want it to leave the organization, but I need to send an Excel document to a SaaS application that we use, and it processes, it reads that Excel doc and then does something else with it. If I encrypt that document, it's going to break that process. So again, back to, thinking through how we're going to use these labels, but at the same time, there's no reason for that Excel document to leave our organization. So I'm going to put a DLP policy on it, but I'm also going to leave it unencrypted. And that's the good middle ground that allows you to stay productive and stay secure kind of all at the same time. So I could certainly send this off. And then what'll happen is Pat will get it. Pat's identity will be in Azure AD. And then essentially what he'll be able to do is and Pat, if you want, feel free to just take a screenshot of it where it shows the lock next to the email. It should show you a little lock. Yeah, there you go. And so Pat responded and sent that back, but he was immediately able to read that email. Now let me send him. So that was an unencrypted label. So let's actually make maybe see if we can create a encrypted label and send it over in that amount of time. So let's do this on the fly here.
And there's a question while you're doing that as well. Can you force the user to select something for a label before sending, even if it's unclassified or general?
Yes. So you can force users to apply some sort of label. Yep. So as soon as they create a new document, or even retroactively, we see this a lot. You can, as soon as they, once you've rolled it out and you've rolled out that control that says users must apply some sort of label to Word documents and Excel docs and all that. The next time they go to save, it's going to say, hey, well, this one doesn't have a label. Pick something. And that's where you can say, okay, if, when in doubt, choose general, and then we can come back to it in our walk or run stage. So yeah, good question. That is a good way to kind of get things moving, is get people just starting to label stuff. All right, so let's create a label real quick. The problem with this is could take a second to publish. Create label. Yeah. Display. Yeah. Next.
We do recommend having more descriptive than the title for there, because he's going to look back in a year and wonder what in the world he was doing.
That's right. So assign permissions. So what I'm going to do is the cool thing I can do here is I believe if I do maybe I don't need app. I can say anybody with RSMUS is able to be a co-author. So it's there's a lot of flexibility here. So there's who are you going to choose, and then I could say I could add another domain, but I could say that domain isn't a co-author. It's some other permission. So there's a lot of flexibility to say within a single label, this domain can do this domain can do that, and all sorts of different things there. So we'll do next. We're not going to auto label. Next, create label. So one, I'm going to create the label here, and I know we're going to potentially run up on time. Yeah, that's fine. Or Pat. So here you go. So users must provide a justification. Yes. Require users to apply a label. Yes. I'm not going to turn that on, but that's where you could do it. Require users within Power BI. So this is interesting when you have sensitive information going into Power BI. That's that just recently came out, but they are starting to again extend Microsoft information protection into a lot of other areas. And then we're going to do a default label. Label. Wow, they have really in the middle of here. Oh no, up to 24 hours to publish. And so yeah, so essentially publishing that label will then push that out. And we might get it here in a little bit, but I'll keep talking. So publishing that label will then push it out to all of the users in the organization. They will see that for Pat label. And then again, that's where you'd have to have good documentation, because they'd have to remember, okay, depending on how we for encrypted files, depending on how we structured the permissions, they would need to remember, when I use this label, it's only giving these groups of folks this type of permission. And so sometimes we see this on like sensitive projects, like, hey, create me a sensitive information type or sensitivity label for a specific project that we're going to work on for 6 months. And so that's a good way to do it, because then you can say, okay, we know all the people that are going to be on this project, including maybe the outside party or the client that we're working with. You then put all of those different RBAC controls in that, and then that way those are the only people on that classified project that are going to be able to read all the documents that you're generating for that time frame. And then when everything's done, the cool thing again is everything that's encrypted, you can essentially just go and say, hey, pull all of the access to all of the files on that project for whatever reason, as an example, and then kind of archive that project, so to speak. So you can get granular with, hey, we're done with this. Let's pull all the access to those documents for that label away from everybody. So let me see here. Let me just jump back in. Maybe Microsoft's being fast today.
There are a few questions in the chat, Jonathan, as well. Any recommended approach to get users using the labels? And also, are there any end user documents that can be used to educate them before rolling out? So I'm not sure if Microsoft has any resources on the support or learn avenue.
So yeah, so for the first one, recommended approach. Again, Microsoft has some documentation around it. Like I said, we've put together our own methodology of crawl, walk, run, and obviously there's a lot of details behind how we would do that and the methodology there. We're always happy to help people through that. We've done this a number of times, but there absolutely is good, Microsoft documentation for starter labels and use cases and things of that nature. But it is a complex thing. Like I said, there's heavy user involvement, heavy design, descriptors, sponsorship within the organization. There's a big change. You need to make sure that people are buying into this from the top levels. And then obviously the technicalities of it. But yeah, Microsoft is very, this is a big emphasis for them, and it will continue to be. So there is a lot of, learn.microsoft articles and technets around this. End user facing documents, again, there might be a few packages out there that, a zip file that with flyers and banners similar to like, hey, Intune's coming, or hey, what's MFA and why do we need it? I'd have to look that up and see what's currently out there, but we've kind of homegrown the items that we have. Yeah.
I was kind of looking at like CASB. Some people recommend turning, if you haven't, you're giving people keys to the kingdom and you turn CASB on like in a read-only mode, so you can kind of capture and see what's going on and then block those things as you go along. I was thinking of labeling like kind of a read-only thing, or just a look-see first before you actually lock it down.
Yeah, good point. So yeah, to that point, absolutely. That's where we publish the labels. There's really no encryption ever. And what we, what we do is we create a couple labels, one that says protected but isn't actually encrypted, and then one that says not protected. And we kind of just let users, pick and choose which ones they think should be protected. And then you get all of that audit feedback of who's applying labels and things of that nature. And actually one of the proprietary things that we created that Microsoft doesn't actually have currently that we're working with them on is the ability to provide more context around the auditing components of that. So if we think about information protection, we think about the activity logs. Oh boy, let's see if I can find the activity. So it'll tell you, which activity or which labels have been applied. I'm trying to find the audit logs, but essentially what we've done is we have gone and created some Power Automate capabilities and worked with the graph so how labels were applied and who's applying them. But what we've started to do is capture the user profiles and then be able to carve it up by department and by location and office. And that's something that Microsoft doesn't have today natively. But what we've seen a high demand for because of the way that AIP is rolled out, you want to see, hey, which departments are really, grasping this concept and really starting to use it, and which departments aren't so much. And so Microsoft really only allows you to do it on a user by user basis. So we've created some intellectual property that will go out and use the Microsoft graph, grab all of those audit logs, and then we can get more granular and carve up the data to show departments and show these other aspects of which users are kind of doing really good adoption. And
is it actually locking it down?
Say that again.
Is it actually locking it down at that point? Oh, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. So and then at that point, then once you have all that data, then you can start making the decisions of, is it just going to be a DLP policy? Should we add encryption to this? Things of that nature. So that's kind of the flow, to your point. So
we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
And I did want to just real quick call out the winner of the participation gift card and everything like that, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So the winner from the randomizer is Troy Ewert. Well, probably didn't pronounce the last name correctly, but gave it an honest effort. Troy, if you're still on here, want to say congratulations. Well, you did. You just actually had a comment about the camera that was on. Should do it based on GIFs.
Yeah.
That's what we got to do next time, is everyone drop their favorite one in, and then it gets voted, whatever one gets the most likes, right?
Exactly.
Nice. Again, the kind of the focus of this was, what tools are out there? How do we govern and access, how do we govern control to our sensitive information? What's the kind of the full roadmap across Zero Trust? What information protection capabilities are out there? And then I think one of the bigger things is understanding that those sensitivity labels can be applied to documents that aren't necessarily living within SharePoint or the Microsoft workloads. Like we can put labels on files that are living on file shares. We can use AIP scanners to go out and look for those known sensitive information types or the sensitivity, the information that we're looking for that would be inside a sensitivity label, and then identify those and bring back reports that says, hey, this is where your sensitive information is. This is the label that we would apply to it if you turn on auto labeling. And then you can start to make decisions not only across the Microsoft workloads, but also across your on-prem environment as well. So again, Azure Information Protection follows the file. And so any file that you open up within the Office suite of products, you're going to have that labeling capability there, and then you can put that label on that file. So that's one of the good things about it is it's not just within the 365 ecosphere.
And just so everyone knows, I did post the experience from the Outlook desktop client of receiving that initial message. There's the first picture, and then the second picture is the actual message as well. So once it opened up and configured the information rights management.
Yeah. Pat, did it take you into the portal or did it bring you back into Outlook?
Trying
to remember if it
was able to do directly into Outlook. It didn't take me into the portal. I guess if I click read the message, then it takes me to the portal. So at first I had to configure information rights management locally to let me open up the message. And then now it took me into the portal once I clicked the read the message in the middle of the screen.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. Okay. And I know, the initial time, if you haven't, been in it, it'll do some of that IRM pop-up stuff. But yeah, in theory, there should be like a little lock in next to it. So
which you can see on the little thumbnail, but we got
there you go. Yeah. Yep. So I guess with that, thank you everybody for attending. Feel free to reach out whenever. Happy to just discuss more or talk about needs and things of that nature, or hopefully can be on this again. So appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you both for your presentation. That was awesome.
Thanks all.
Thank you all.
I'm going to stick around for a second. So if anybody has any questions.
Hey, do you guys need anything from me for the gift card at all or not?
I believe the email you registered with, I wasn't going to read out loud just because of private information, but I believe as long as that's accurate, we'll reach out to you.
Yep, that's the email.